What if I told you that Kast Media and Colin Thomson allegedly defrauded some of the most popular podcasters, including Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette? Now, this isn't your run-of-the-mill tale of deceit. This is a story that has left the podcasting world reeling. A story that involves some of the biggest names in the business. A narrative that's not just about the money, but the trust that was breached and the reputations that were tarnished. Imagine being at the top of your game, reaching millions with your voice, your ideas, your passion. Now imagine that trust, that platform you've built, being exploited. This is the alleged reality for Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette. These are not just any podcasters, these are some of the most influential voices in the industry. Theo, with his unique comedic style and storytelling prowess. Brendan Schaub, a former professional MMA fighter turned stand-up comedian and podcast host. Whitney Cummings, a renowned comedian, actress, producer, and writer. And Jim Cornette, a legendary wrestling figure and outspoken commentator. And who was at the center of this alleged fraud? Kast Media, a major player in the podcasting industry, and Colin Thomson, its CEO. This is not a story about an underdog swindler duping the big guys. This is a tale of alleged deceit at the highest levels of podcasting, involving some of the biggest names in the business. The magnitude of this alleged fraud is immense. The trust that has been potentially broken, the reputations that might have been damaged, the fans who may have been let down, it's all staggering. Yet it's essential to remember that these are still allegations. The truth, as they say, is often stranger than fiction. So, where does this leave us? On the precipice of a mystery that begs to be unraveled. A story that needs to be told, not just for the sake of the podcasters involved, but for the entire podcasting community. Now, you might be wondering, how did this happen? Well, let's dive into the details. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the world of podcasting, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell for more updates. Stay tuned as we unravel this mystery together. The story starts back in early 2020 when Kast Media, managed by Colin Thomson, began to gain momentum. It was a time of vast potential and growth for the podcast industry. Kast Media, under the helm of Colin Thomson, was just another name in the sea of media companies, but it was not destined to remain so. Thomson, with his charismatic persona and impressive portfolio, began to make waves early on. His vision for the company was clear, and the mission was simple: to reshape the podcast industry, to bring unique and compelling content to listeners worldwide. The journey of Kast Media was not a lonely one. Thomson, with his knack for networking, began to form partnerships with some of the biggest names in the industry. Popular podcasters like Theo, Brendan Schaub, and Whitney Cummings were drawn to the allure of Kast Media. It was an exciting time, a time when dreams seemed within reach and aspirations seemed tangible. Jim Cornette, another prominent podcaster, was also charmed by the potential Kast Media and Thomson presented. These were not just partnerships formed out of convenience or financial gain. These were collaborations born out of shared visions and mutual respect. As the partnerships grew, so did the stature of Kast Media. Colin Thomson, once just a name, was now a force to reckon with. His rise was swift, his impact undeniable. But beneath the surface of this success story, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. As Kast Media soared to new heights, whispers of discontent began to surface. There were inklings of something amiss, but these were quickly brushed aside. After all, success often breeds envy, and criticism is the tax one pays for fame. But as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold. As these podcasters were basking in the glory of their newfound success, they were oblivious to the storm that was brewing. Little did these podcasters know they were allegedly walking into a trap. Everything seemed to be going well until the first signs of trouble started to appear. This is where our story takes a turn into the murky waters of deception. It all began subtly, like a whisper in the wind that you can't quite catch. The first inklings of the alleged fraud started to surface as unexpected changes in contract terms began cropping up. One day, a clause was added. The next, a stipulation was tweaked, and these changes were minor, almost imperceptible, but they were the first signs of a much larger, more ominous picture. The whispers grew louder when payment issues started to emerge. Imagine working tirelessly, pouring your heart and soul into your passion, and then, at the end of the day, not getting paid for it. That's what started happening. Payments were delayed, reduced, or sometimes not made at all. Excuses were made, reasons were given, but the bottom line remained the same. People were not getting paid for their work. Among those affected were notable personalities like Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette. These were individuals who had built their careers on their talent and hard work. They had trusted Kast Media and Colin Thomson to handle their affairs, but instead found themselves entangled in a web of deception. As the issues continued to pile up, it became apparent that something was not right. The contract changes, the payment issues, they were not just isolated incidents, but part of a larger scheme. But what was the motive behind it? Was it just greed, or was there more to it? This period of uncertainty and confusion was a stressful time for everyone involved. They were left in the dark, not knowing what was happening or why. The trust they had placed in Kast Media and Colin Thomson was shaken, and their careers were hanging in the balance. The situation was dire, but it was about to get worse. Unbeknownst to them, this was just the tip of the iceberg. The first signs of trouble had made their appearance, but the real deception was yet to be uncovered. Little did they know they were just at the beginning of a series of unfortunate events. This was just the beginning of a series of unfortunate events. As more and more inconsistencies surfaced, suspicions began to arise. Imagine a puzzle, a complex, intricate jigsaw where each piece represents a fact, an event, or a statement. Now imagine if these pieces, once perfectly fitting together, started to warp and twist, leaving gaps in the once seamless image. That's what was happening here. The puzzle that was Kast Media and Colin Thomson was changing, and not for the better. Whispers started to circulate, quiet murmurings turned into loud conversations. People began to question, to probe, to dig deeper. Podcasters, once blissfully unaware of the potential deceit, started noticing the cracks in the facade. The inconsistencies were not just minor discrepancies anymore. They were glaring anomalies that couldn't be ignored. Let's take a moment to appreciate the power of suspicion. It's like a seed, tiny at first, but given the right conditions, it can grow into a towering tree of doubt. And that's what happened. The seed of suspicion planted in the minds of Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette began to grow. And with growth came action. These podcasters, our central figures in this narrative, weren't just passive observers. They were active participants, caught in a web of inconsistencies and potential deceit. Their reactions varied, as one would expect. Some were incredulous, some angered, others simply confused. But they all shared a common goal: to uncover the truth. Investigations began, an endeavor to untangle the complex web spun by Kast Media and Colin Thomson. Every stone was turned, every lead followed, every piece of information meticulously examined. The pursuit of truth was relentless, and with every new discovery, the picture of what was really happening became clearer. And here's the thing about the truth: it's like the sun after a storm, it always comes out. The cloud of inconsistencies and suspicions that had once obscured the reality was starting to dissipate. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together again, but the image they were forming was far from the one initially presented. The truth was slowly starting to come out. Finally, the alleged fraudulent activities of Kast Media and Colin Thomson were exposed. This was the point where whispers turned into shouts, and the shadows of doubt were illuminated by the harsh light of reality. Picture this: the podcasters, Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, Jim Cornette, who were all allegedly duped, finally waking up to the reality of their situation. Their reactions were a mix of shock, disbelief, anger, and perhaps even a hint of relief that the truth was finally out in the open. In the world of podcasting, trust is everything. The bond between the podcaster and their audience is intimate and personal, built over countless hours of shared stories, laughter, and insights. To realize that this bond had been exploited, that trust had been abused, was a bitter pill to swallow. And then there was the public reaction, the fans, the listeners, the everyday people who had tuned in week after week, year after year. They too had placed their trust in these podcasters and the platform that hosted them. Their reactions were a mirror image of the podcasters: shock, disbelief, anger, but there was also a sense of betrayal. After all, they had invested their time, their attention, and in many cases, their money into these shows. Yet, amidst the waves of emotion, there was also a sense of resolve, a determination to hold those responsible accountable to ensure that this alleged deception did not go unpunished. Social media was ablaze with discussions, debates, and demands for justice. In the midst of this whirlwind of reactions, there was a valuable lesson to be learned: that in a world where technology can connect us in the most extraordinary ways, it also has the potential to exploit and deceive. But it is through these trials and tribulations that we learn, grow, and become more vigilant. And just like that, Kast Media and Colin Thomson's alleged scheme was brought to light. The exposure of the alleged fraud sent shockwaves through the podcast industry. In the wake of the exposure, the podcast industry was left reeling. The accusations against Kast Media and Colin Thomson had far-reaching implications, not just for those directly affected, but for the entire industry. Suddenly, the trust and credibility that podcasts had painstakingly built over the years were under scrutiny. This was a stark reminder that even in this seemingly intimate medium, deception could lurk in the shadows. Legal actions swiftly followed the exposure. Allegedly defrauded personalities like Theo, Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette wasted no time in seeking justice. Lawsuits were filed, legal teams assembled, and court dates set. The wheels of justice were in motion, but the road to resolution was long and winding. Meanwhile, the court of public opinion was in full session. Social media platforms were abuzz with reactions. Some expressed shock and disbelief, struggling to reconcile the image of Kast Media and Colin Thomson they had known with the allegations. Others voiced their support for the defrauded personalities, rallying behind them in their quest for justice. Yet, there were also those who saw this as an opportunity to cast doubt on the credibility of the podcast industry as a whole. The impact on the podcast industry was significant. The trust that listeners placed in podcast creators and the companies they associated with was shaken. Many began questioning the integrity of their favorite shows and the authenticity of their hosts. Podcast creators, in turn, had to confront the reality that their platforms could be exploited and that they had a responsibility to their listeners to ensure the transparency and authenticity of their operations. In response to the scandal, many in the industry began to call for greater oversight and transparency. The need for a more robust system of checks and balances became clear. This was a wake-up call, a reminder that the industry needed to evolve if it was to continue to earn the trust of its listeners. The aftermath of the exposure was a tumultuous period marked by legal battles, public outcry, and industry-wide soul-searching. It was a time of reckoning, a time of change. But it was also a time of resilience. The podcast industry, though shaken, showed its resolve to learn from this incident and to work towards a more secure and trustworthy future. While the dust has settled, the scars remain. The question now is, how can such fraudulent activities be prevented in the future? A question that echoes in the minds of many as we delve deeper into the abyss of deception and betrayal. The first step towards prevention is, without a doubt, due diligence. It's about being cautious, about asking the right questions, and about being thorough in our research. This means verifying the legitimacy of companies we associate with, scrutinizing their track records, and understanding the full picture before making any commitments. Then comes the need for transparency in contracts. Contracts are the bedrock of any business relationship, and it's essential that they are clear, concise, and transparent. A transparent contract leaves no room for manipulation or deceit. It outlines the terms of the agreement in a straightforward manner, leaving no stone unturned. It's a protective shield, safeguarding both parties from any potential harm or misunderstanding. And lastly, but certainly not least, the importance of legal counsel cannot be overstated. In a world where legal jargon can often be a maze of confusion, having a legal expert on your side can be a game changer. They can navigate through this maze, ensuring that your rights are protected and that you are not taken advantage of. Legal counsel provides an additional layer of security, offering advice and guidance and ensuring that the contracts you sign are in your best interest. These are just a few of the potential preventive measures that can be taken. But prevention at its core is about being informed, about being vigilant, and about not letting our guard down. It's about learning from the past so we don't repeat the same mistakes in the future. By learning from this unfortunate event, we can hopefully prevent such incidents in the future. It's a lesson learned the hard way, but a lesson nonetheless. And with the right preventive measures in place, we can pave the way for a future that is free from such fraudulent activities. The alleged fraud by Kast Media and Colin Thomson serves as a stark reminder of the potential dangers lurking in the podcast industry. It's a world where creativity thrives, where voices are amplified, where stories are shared. Yet beneath the surface, it can also be a breeding ground for deception and dishonesty. Our journey took us through a shocking revelation, the beginning of the scheme, the intricate web of deception, and unraveling of the truth, and exposure of the culprits, the aftermath, and the prevention measures that could be taken. Each step, each revelation, each story served as pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, painted a vivid picture of the alleged fraud committed by Kast Media and Colin Thomson against podcast personalities such as Theo, Brendan Schaub, Whitney Cummings, and Jim Cornette. What did we learn through this investigation? We learned that in an industry as dynamic and fast-paced as podcasting, vigilance is key. There's a need for transparency and accountability. There's a need to question, to probe, to not accept things at face value. This isn't about promoting suspicion, but about encouraging due diligence. We learned about the importance of contracts, of understanding the fine print, of knowing your rights and your worth. We also learned that even the most successful, the most savvy among us can fall victim to fraud. It's a sobering reminder that no one is immune, that everyone is susceptible. But perhaps the most important lesson we learned is that resilience and strength can emerge from adversity, that those affected can use their experiences to educate others, to advocate for change, to turn a negative into a positive. So what next? How do we move forward? It starts with awareness, with understanding the risks and the potential pitfalls. It continues with education, with sharing experiences and learning from others. It involves advocating for change, for stronger regulations and protections. And it requires us to stand together, to support each other, to ensure that the podcast industry remains a safe and fair space for all. In the end, it's up to us to ensure that the podcast industry remains a safe and fair space for all.